On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the sixth movie in the James Bond franchise, and this is arguably one of the most polarizing of all the James Bond films. Many fans cite this movie as one of their favorite Bond films, while just as many would place this as one of the worst. So we're going to talk about perhaps the most controversial of all the James Bond movies. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is an interesting film because there's a lot to like here. No one can deny that it has an incredible story. It has beautiful exotic locales set in the mountains of Switzerland. It has amazing heart-pounding action, and it has arguably one of the best Bond girls in Diana Rigg, and it has a menacing villain in Telly Savalas. These are undeniably positive factors of the film. Whether you like this film or not, it really depends on one thing, and that is what you thought of George Lazenby as James Bond. And I saw this movie for the first time when I was a teenager back in 1984, and by this time I was already a huge Bond fan, and I'd seen almost all the James Bond films, and for me, James Bond was either Sean Connery or Roger Moore. And that's when I learned there was a third James Bond. And I remember when I saw it, I hated this movie. I couldn't get past George Lazenby as James Bond. He didn't have the charismatic swagger of Sean Connery, he didn't have the suave sophistication of Roger Moore, and he just seemed stiff and wooden and bland and boring. And throughout the whole film, I remember thinking to myself, that's not Bond. Well, apparently many fans did agree at the time. But now, 50 years later, 6 James Bond actors passed, people generally seem to have a different opinion of this film. And I'm watching it today in preparation for this video, and I haven't seen it in a while, but I have to admit, I was actually enjoying George Lazenby in the role, and I have to admit, it was far better than I remembered. And I'm appreciating how amazing this movie actually is. Well, after the campy turn in Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, Eon was trying to reboot the series in a more realistic, non-campy style, in the vein of the 1963 From Russia with Love, and later they do this again in the 1982 For Your Eyes Only with Roger Moore, in 1989 License to Kill with Timothy Dalton, and the 2006 Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. And this film's got a great car chase, there's an insane ski sequence, and there's a heart-pounding action sequence on a bobsled. However, the problem was at that time, fans were probably in some kind of Sean Connery withdrawal syndrome, and George Lazenby just wasn't enough to satisfy their craving. Well, time has been very kind to this movie, and now it's regarded as one of the best James Bond movies. It actually holds an 81% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and in 2012, Entertainment Weekly's list of James Bond movies, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was actually ranked number 6 out of 23 movies. And numerous other lists and reviews seem to agree that this is one of the best James Bond movies. Well, let's go back to a time when Sean Connery was almost the star of this movie. So originally in 1965, just after Goldfinger, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was going to be the 4th film, and Richard Maybaum even worked on the script for On Her Majesty's Secret Service all the way back in 1965. However, the lawsuit between Ian Fleming and Kevin McClory over the rights to Thunderball had just settled, and Eon Productions knew that they had to address the Kevin McClory problem. And so Kevin McClory was brought in to produce the 4th James Bond movie, and Thunderball became James Bond movie number 4. So please check out my Thunderball video for details to that exciting drama. It's a must-view for any James Bond fan. Then On Her Majesty's Secret Service was going to be the 5th movie after Thunderball, with You Only Live Twice following it. And this would have perfectly followed the order of the novels, where Thunderball is the 9th book, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the 10th book, and You Only Live Twice is the 11th book. And the 3 books are collectively known as the Blofeld Trilogy. However, the production crew was having difficulty location scouting for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because Switzerland had had a particularly warm winter and much of the snow had melted, so it would have taken much longer to find suitable locations for the movie. Therefore, Eon decided to switch the order and make You Only Live Twice first and On Her Majesty's Secret Service next. However, during filming of You Only Live Twice, Sean Connery announced that he was not going to return for the next movie. So Harry Saltzman wanted to hire Roger Moore for the role of James Bond and make the movie Man with a Golden Gun and film it in Cambodia. However, we know what happened in Cambodia at that time, and so the political instability made filming in Cambodia impossible. So Roger Moore decided to sign on for one more season of The Saint, and the project was canceled. However, Roger Moore would eventually get his chance to play Bond in less than 4 years in the 1973 film Live and Let Die. Saltzman and Broccoli began to audition and screen test hundreds of actors in Hollywood, and the leading candidates included John Richardson, who had starred in 1 Million BC with Raquel Welch. Another actor considered was Anthony Rogers, who played Sir Dinadan in Camelot. Also actor Georges Fountas, and many, many more. And another actor considered was a young Terrence Stamp, who would later go on to play General Zod in the 1978 Superman movie, and also a young Oliver Reed, but Eon feared that he was too well known and would distract from the James Bond character. Saltzman and Broccoli also considered a 24-year-old actor named Timothy Dalton, and they approached him, and Timothy Dalton, who was a diehard fan of the Ian Fleming novels, felt that he was too young for the role and turned it down, but he did ask them to keep him in mind later on. 10 years later, Timothy Dalton would play Prince Baron in Dino De Laurentiis' 1980 film Flash Gordon, and of course we know that Timothy Dalton would get to play 007 22 years later in the 1987 The Living Daylights and 1989 License to Kill. And then Eon shocked the world by announcing that their new James Bond would be a complete unknown, a model named George Lazenby. George Lazenby was born in Goulburn, New South Wales in Australia and was the son of working-class parents. His father was a railway worker and his mother worked in a retail shop. And George was born with kidney problems and spent 18 months in a hospital having surgery, one which left him with only half a kidney. And the doctors told his parents that he'd be lucky if he made it to the age of 14. George was a wild child growing up and didn't even graduate high school. He served in the Australian Army and then got a job as a mechanic and then as a car salesman. At the age of 24, he moved to London to pursue a woman he had fallen in love with, and there he got another job as a car salesman in London, and he was so successful at selling cars that he soon got a job selling Mercedes-Benzes. While selling cars at the Mercedes-Benz dealership, he was spotted by a talent scout who persuaded him to become a male model. And soon he was making £25,000 a year, and that's $30,000 a year in 1996 and worth about $300,000 a year today. And in 1966, he was voted the top male model of the year in Europe. And that's not bad for a high school dropout. And then came his most famous job, which was for a TV commercial for Big Fry's chocolate rolls, and this made him a local celebrity around London. And Lazenby's talent agent, Maggie Abbott, and called him saying that they were casting for the new James Bond movie, and she thought he'd be perfect for the role. And when he asked why, she answered, "Because you're so arrogant." She told him to sneak into the casting director's office and get an audition. So he found out where Sean Connery's tailor was in Savile Row and asked him to make a suit just like Sean Connery. But unfortunately, they said it would take 6 months to do. However, he was in luck. The tailor had one suit already made that Connery hadn't picked up yet, and Lazenby just took it. The sleeves were a little short, but he got another tailor to lengthen the sleeves, and Lazenby was in luck. He then went to Sean Connery's barber and asked him to get a haircut just like Sean Connery. And the lore is that Albert Broccoli just happened to be in the barber as well. And this may sound like a huge coincidence, but it wasn't really. This was a barber shop that was just outside the studio, so everyone associated with the Bond movies got their haircut there. Still, Broccoli quietly noticed Lazenby and was very impressed. Well, the casting director was also impressed by George Lazenby's looks and walked him over to meet Harry Saltzman. And the producers had apparently previously interviewed over 400 actors, and when he showed up to meet Broccoli and Saltzman, they asked if he'd been in any movies, and George Lazenby hadn't been in anything. His only credit was that chocolate commercial. So Lazenby did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. He lied through his teeth, and he told Broccoli and Saltzman that he'd been in dozens of TV shows all around the world, and Broccoli and Saltzman bought it. And they were so impressed with him that they flew in director Peter Hunt to meet with their potential James Bond. And by the time Lazenby met with Peter Hunt, he knew the jig was up, and he just couldn't keep up this lie, and so he caved. He admitted to Peter Hunt that he was completely lying and that he never acted in anything before. And he thought he was going to be kicked off the set, but Peter Hunt started laughing and said, "You just fooled two of the most ruthless guys I know. Keep up your story and I'll make you the next James Bond." And Peter Hunt continued to champion George Lazenby throughout the screen tests. And Lazenby was given 4 months of screen tests. And one of the screen tests was an action scene where he was fighting with a stunt coordinator who was also a professional wrestler. And during the audition, Lazenby, who had never acted before, actually hit the stunt coordinator in the face and broke his nose. And Lazenby immediately realized what he'd done and started apologizing to the stuntman. But Krubby Broccoli loved Lazenby's ability to convey aggression on screen, and Harry Saltzman rushed over to Lazenby and said, "We're going with you," and they cast him as James Bond. And so George Lazenby became the next 007. For director, Saltzman and Broccoli had always been impressed by what Peter Hunt had done for the series. Peter Hunt edited Dr. No and is regarded as one of the unsung heroes who helped make that movie the fun roller coaster ride that it was. He went on to edit From Russia with Love and both edited and acted as second unit director for Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice. He was the silent MVP of the entire James Bond franchise up to that point, and he lobbied very hard for this directorial role, and Saltzman and Broccoli decided to give him this one chance. Now, because this is George Lazenby's first acting job, they wanted to hire an experienced veteran actress to play opposite him. And they initially went with Brigitte Bardot, who turned down the role to star in a movie called Chocolat opposite Sean Connery. And so they chose Diana Rigg as Countessa Teresa di Vincenzo. Diana Rigg was born in Doncaster in South Yorkshire, but when she was 2 months old, her father, an executive for a railroad company, moved to India where she would live until the age of 8. And therefore, Diana Rigg spoke fluent Hindi as a second language. They moved back to England, and after graduating, she joined the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and at age 21, she acted for the Royal Shakespeare Company and would continue stage acting for the next 8 years. She had multiple roles on stage, TV, and film, but her most notable role was 3 seasons on The Avengers as Emma Peel, opposite Patrick Macnee's John Steed. She replaced Honor Blackman, who left the show to star as Pussy Galore in Goldfinger. And by the time she was cast in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, she was an experienced veteran actress and an absolute professional, having been in hundreds of roles over the course of 18 years. And when Diana Rigg met George Lazenby, she was initially very supportive of him and tried to help him with his scenes. However, as filming progressed, she apparently grew more and more annoyed by his antics, although she remained professional throughout the filming of the movie. Now, to this day, she is best known as Emma Peel and Teresa Bond, and to the younger generation as Olenna Tyrell in HBO's Game of Thrones. The movie starts out with a gun barrel sequence, and this one's very different. We get George Lazenby, who turns and drops down on one knee as he fires his gun. And then as the blood drips down, it covers the entire gun barrel. It's a small difference, but it's different enough to signal that this is going to be a very different Bond film. So the movie starts out with Bond driving in his car, but we don't actually see him. It's a mystery. And I love this. And in 1969, audiences were excited to have a glimpse of the new Bond. And I like how they tease the moment. Just a little bit. It's a smart move. He spots a woman who's about to drown herself in the ocean, and he runs to rescue her. And then he says the line,
"Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond."
But he's attacked by her bodyguards, and they have a fight on the beach, and it's a brutal fight. It's very violent. And this is what George Lazenby really does well. He's a man of action, and he's able to lend that portrayal to his Bond. And he brutalizes the two men, and it sets the stage that this movie is going to be very action-packed. Originally, they wanted to explain that James Bond in the movie gets plastic surgery. And the idea was that James Bond, the Sean Connery version, was so well known to his enemies that he needed to change his look to prevent from being recognized. And it's a nice idea, but ultimately they decided that the best way to deal with this was not to deal with it. So they decided not to draw attention to the casting change and just have Lazenby be Bond without any explanation. But then they decided to do this during the opening of the movie. And Bond, seeing Teresa drive off, says,
"This never happened to the other fella."
And apparently this line was not in the script, and it was director Peter Hunt's idea at the last minute. Because all throughout production, George Lazenby apparently would joke, "This never happened to the other fellow," and it usually got a big laugh from the crew. Well, Peter Hunt thought it would be hilarious if he said it here. And of course, in retrospect, this completely draws attention to the fact that this new actor is playing Bond, and also breaks the fourth wall in a way the franchise had not done up to this point. And I do feel it's a terrible mistake. It sets the wrong tone for the movie, and it just makes me cringe when I hear it, and pulls me out of the movie, at least for a little bit. And this line will go down as the most maligned phrase in the entire film. And then we get a very different music montage. First of all, it really has no song and no lyrics. It's only an instrumental. And so far, I think it's the only one in the entire franchise not to have lyrics. And we get images from past James Bond movies. Shots of Pussy Galore, Art Goldfinger, Domino Vitale, Fiona Volpe, Aki, Kissy Suzuki. I guess it's supposed to remind you that this movie is part of that James Bond universe. Well, 2 criticisms of George Lazenby's performance is that he sounds boring when he speaks and that he's stiff and wooden when he walks. And I would agree. And it also doesn't help that he's following Sean Connery, who captured the audience every time he opened his mouth and seemed to float on screen every time he moved. I have to admit, these two things really bothered me in the past when I watched this movie. Well, when they started to film Lazenby, he had a thick Australian accent and had this side-to-side swagger when he walked that looked exaggerated on camera. And you can see it every once in a while, that side-to-side swagger come back. Therefore, he had to have extensive vocal coaching so that he could sound more English, and had a movement coach to stop that side-to-side swagger. And seeing it from that point of view, I have to admit, he really didn't do a bad job. So Draco meets up with Tracy, who then is captured by her father, who is Draco, the head of a European crime syndicate family called the Unione Corse, which is a real organization. They're the organization behind the French Connection, and they smuggled heroin from Turkey to France and the US, and worked closely with the American Mafia and the Sicilian Mafia, as well as the Camorra. And Draco tells Bond that Tracy is his only daughter, but he needs a strong man.
Tracy.
Yes, Tracy.
And he'll give Bond £1 million if he marries her. But Bond refuses.
Listen to me. On the day you marry her, I'll give you a personal dowry of £1 million in gold.
But I don't need £1 million.
Stop it.
But agrees to meet with Tracy if Draco provides him information on Blofeld.
What?
You have connections not open to me. Where is Ernst Stavro Blofeld?
Bond goes to MI6 to go on a mission to assassinate Blofeld, but M refuses to authorize it. So he has Moneypenny write his letter of resignation, but Moneypenny changes the letter to have Bond request 2 weeks of leave, which M is more than happy to approve. Moneypenny always did have Bond's back. And the filmmakers wanted to establish that this James Bond was the same Bond as the one played by Sean Connery. And when he's suspended by M, he goes into his office and starts looking at the memorabilia from his past movies. A throwing knife, a watch with a strangle wire, and the underwater breather from Thunderball. And James Bond breaks into the office of Blofeld's lawyer. And James Bond uses an automatic safecracker to crack open their safe, but while he's waiting, he finds a Playboy magazine and spends the next few minutes looking at the centerfold. And this issue of Playboy is from February 1969 and is a reference to the fact that Ian Fleming actually published On Her Majesty's Secret Service in Playboy magazine. And it was serialized in Playboy, and February 1969 is the first issue where On Her Majesty's Secret Service was first published in serialization. And he learns that Blofeld has been in correspondence with a genealogist named Sir Hilary Bray. So now Bond is hot on the trail of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. So Bond visits the London College of Arms genealogist Sir Hilary Bray, who says that Blofeld has been attempting to claim the title of Count Balthazar de Bluchamp.
Came across a letter from Gebruder Gumbol, solicitors in Switzerland, to a certain Count Balthazar de Bluchamp.
De Bluchamp?
French form of Blofeld.
And there's another fun element that occurs in the genealogist's office. Sir Hilary Bray, the genealogist, studied Bond's name and says that the Bond family crest goes back to 1734 and that it's Orbis non sufficient, translated to The World Is Not Enough, which will be the title of a future James Bond movie starring Pierce Brosnan. 007 disguises himself as the genealogist and decides to investigate a spa run by Blofeld, and is met at the train station by Blofeld's right-hand henchwoman, Irma Bunt. And seeing her for 1 second, you can tell that she's evil. And she's played by German actress Ilse Steppet, who was planned to return in the next film Diamonds Are Forever, but she passed away in December 1969, so this will be her final role. And they get to Blofeld's base, and it is an amazing location. It is a rotating restaurant, the Piz Gloria, atop the Schiltor Mountain near the village of Murin. And so, when James Bond investigates Blofeld's allergy clinic posing as Sir Hilary Bray, these scenes, George Lazenby is dubbed by Sir Hilary Bray actor George Baker. And here he meets Blofeld, played by Telly Savalas, who plays a completely different Blofeld than the cerebral mastermind that was played by Donald Pleasance. Here he's more active, he's more physically intimidating, which is more in line with the novels. And this will fit because he's going to have a mano-a-mano fistfight with Bond later in the movie. Telly Savalas was born in 1922 in New York to Greek immigrant parents. And as a child, Savalas was a renowned swimmer and worked as a lifeguard on the beach. During World War II, he served in the U.S. Army in the 12th Medical Training Battalion and served 2 years until he was discharged after being injured in a car accident where he broke his pelvis and spent over a year in the hospital. He then received his bachelor's in psychology from Columbia and was preparing for medical school. He then got a job at the U.S. State Department as the host of Your Voice of America series and worked as an executive producer for ABC News and was the one who hired Howard Cosell for his first job in television. Telly Savalas had not planned on acting, but at age 36, he was asked if he could do a European accent, which he could, and ended up being cast in an episode of Armstrong Circle Theater. He instantly became in demand as a guest star in multiple TV shows, and then starred in Birdman of Alcatraz in 1962, where he was nominated for an Academy Award and a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. This propelled him to superstar status, and at age 40, he started to lose his hair, so he completely shaved his head, leading to his iconic look. He then starred in over 18 major Hollywood films, including Pontius Pilate in The Greatest Story Ever Told, and also starred in The Battle of the Bulge, and as Archer Maggot in The Dirty Dozen. In 1969, he was cast in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Eon paid him a cool $1 million for his role as Ernst Stavro Blofeld. A few years after this movie, he would go on to his most famous role as Lieutenant Theo Kojak on 5 seasons of the crime drama show Kojak. Now, in this movie, Blofeld has a very odd way of holding a cigarette, like he's holding it with his fist. Some speculate that he was not a smoker and was uncomfortable with holding a cigarette, but this is not true. In fact, Telly Savalas was a heavy smoker, and in the mid-70s he was trying to quit, which is why he was always sucking on a lollipop, leading to Kojak's distinct trait. I guess Telly Savalas just had a weird way of holding a cigarette. And oddly, he doesn't seem to recognize Bond, despite having faced him in Japan only one movie ago in You Only Live Twice. And this is an interesting plot hole in this movie. And the real reason is simple, because from the beginning of production, the producers and director Peter Hunt had made up their mind that they were going to follow Ian Fleming's book very closely. And in the books, On Her Majesty's Secret Service comes before You Only Live Twice. So in that book, Bond is meeting Blofeld for the first time here in the Alger Clinic, and then meets him again in You Only Live Twice. So it's really not explained adequately in this movie and leaves you a little confused. And it has the effect of making you think that these two are not the James Bond nor the Blofeld from You Only Live Twice, but two completely different characters. And I think it contributes to this feeling of being somewhat disconnected from the other Bond films. Now at the spa, he can't resist having encounters with all the women there, and this allows him to discover that Blofeld's allergy clinic is actually a front for a Spectre brainwashing center. Bond discovers that the women go to sleep in a sleep-induced hypnotic state while Blofeld implants subliminal audio instructions, and they are in fact being brainwashed to distribute bacteriological warfare agents throughout the world, one that will make people sterile. And these unknowing women are referred to as his 12 agents of death. However, these trysts with all the women allow him to be discovered, and Bond escapes, leading to an incredible action-packed ski chase, arguably one of the best action sequences in the Bond series so far. And this is an awesome ski scene. At one point, he even loses a ski and ends up skiing on one ski. And this will also begin the concept of James Bond being a very proficient Olympic-level skier, one that'll be referenced in The Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, and A View to a Kill. And it's a fun scene to watch even by today's standards. It holds up well. And these scenes were filmed by second unit director John Glenn, who was also the editor of this film. And in editing the film, John Glenn used the same technique used by Peter Hunt with the fast cuts and exaggerated sound effects to accentuate the fast-paced action. And this was John Glenn's first job for the James Bond franchise. He'll return as the editor and second unit director for The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, and then go on to work as second unit director for the 1978 Superman movie. And then he'll get the opportunity to be the director of For Your Eyes Only, which was so successful that he returned to direct Octopussy, A View to a Kill, The Living Daylights, and License to Kill. He was the James Bond franchise throughout the 1980s. And one of the ways John Glenn was able to get the beautiful shots of the Swiss Alps was due to aerial cameraman Johnny Jordan. Johnny Jordan had lost his foot in a helicopter accident while filming You Only Live Twice. The doctors were able to reattach the foot, but after months of recuperating in the hospital, Jordan was still in pain, so he made the difficult decision to amputate his foot. And within a few days, he was up and active again, and he was able to be the cameraman for this movie. Johnny Jordan came up with an interesting technique for filming these scenes. He attached himself to a 15-foot parachute cable and dangled himself from a helicopter. And that is some Daredevil level dedication. And the results are beautiful. Unfortunately, 1 year after filming On Her Majesty's Secret Service, He was doing aerial photography on a film called Catch-22, and he was flying on a helicopter and was known for refusing to wear a safety harness while flying. He leaned out of a helicopter to signal another cameraman, and his hand slipped and he fell out of the helicopter and tragically fell 4,000 feet to his death. And the world lost an incredible and talented cameraman. For the action sequences, John Glenn also hired members of the Swiss Olympic team, and that's why this action sequence looks so crisp and professional. During the filming of this movie, George Lazenby began to let the fame go to his head. Lazenby was already a confident guy, and suddenly he found himself a superstar. Everywhere he went, people were hounding him with cameras, and he loved it. Early in the filming, George Lazenby was getting $100 per diem every day, and he went to Harry Saltzman and asked how much Sean Connery got for his per diem, which was $1,000 a day. Well, George Lazenby asked for $1,000, that he's pretty much doing the same job, and they gave it to him. And a monster was slowly being created. So George Lazenby apparently had a suitcase which was full of cash. And on the set, Telly Savalas, who was a card sharp, started hosting poker parties where he won all of George Lazenby's per diem money. And so Cubby Broccoli had to come in and shut down the whole operation. Now, George Lazenby was having fun on set and he was basking in his newfound stardom. And in one incident, he wanted to go skiing and Cubby Broccoli said absolutely not. They were in the middle of filming and they couldn't risk their main star getting injured. Well, George Lazenby decided to go skiing anyway, and sure enough, had an accident and broke his arm, thus delaying production. And Cubby Broccoli was furious. And in some scenes, you can see Lazenby with a jacket draped over his arm, and this is because he was covering up a cast. So after escaping Blofeld, James Bond runs into Tracy, and the two escape Blofeld's men in this awesome car chase scene where our couples find themselves driving amongst a car race, which they actually win. The car chase was filmed by spraying an ice skating rink with water and freezing it and having Diana Rigg just drive the car. And they were nervous at first, and she originally had difficulty driving the car on ice, but once she realized that she could just bang up the car as much as she wanted, she apparently had a great time. Now the two escape a blizzard by hiding in a shed while Bond professes his love for her. But in the morning, Blofeld and his men find the shack, but Bond and Tracy ski away. Blofeld triggers an avalanche which kills several of his men, but ultimately engulfs the two. And Blofeld captures Tracy, but he leaves Bond alone for some reason. For the avalanche scene, this was filmed in conjunction with the Swiss Army. The Swiss Army has to annually use explosives to create small avalanches and prevent larger snow buildups that can lead to larger and more dangerous avalanches. So they added the Swiss Army creating these small avalanches, and then they added stuntmen later by using old-fashioned optical effects. And the entire sequence was created by a combination of filming the Swiss Army's man-made avalanches, adding some available stock footage, and using good old-fashioned Hollywood special effects and having the actors roll around in salt. James Bond returns to MI6, but M has orders not to commit more MI6 assets to help Tracy. So Bond goes to Draco, and they assault Piz Gloria with 3 helicopters. They save Tracy. Bond takes pictures of the 12 Angels of Death so they can be identified by local authorities and be prevented from releasing the biological weapons, and the team demolishes Piz Gloria. However, Blofeld escapes in a bobsled, leading to another amazing action sequence where Bond grabs another bobsled and is in hot pursuit. And Bond is able to jump onto Blofeld's bobsled where the two fight on the bobsled while speeding down at an incredible rate. And it's a great sequence and still holds up today. Then Blofeld hits a tree and hangs there and appears to be dead. And for the moment where he's caught in the tree, the original scene was done by a stuntman, but it came out looking wrong. So the scene was redone by Telly Savalas himself, but inside a studio. And I have to admit, it looks very convincing. Now for the main musical motif in this movie, we have this very catchy song called We Have All the Time in the World, and it was written by John Barry and performed by Louis Armstrong. And it would be the last song Louis Armstrong would perform before his death 2 years later. And it's a soft, haunting melody. And we know these two don't have much time. And that's the irony of the song and the movie. And the song just haunts the film throughout. Because in many ways, it reflects life in general. In the end, we think we have all the time in the world, but it's never enough, and it always goes by much faster than we expected. And even after, when the film is over, you can't get the song out of your head, and that just elevates this movie to a higher level. I absolutely love the song, and I think it's one of the best things about this movie. James Bond is smitten with Teresa and asks her to marry him. And in the book, it is Teresa that asks Bond to marry her. However, they decided to be better if Bond just asked her. It's a nice wedding. Moneypenny cries, Bond and Q have a nice moment together, and they drive off to live happily ever after. However, in the last surprise scene, Blofeld and Irma Bunt appear and tries to gun down Bond. And he recognizes that it's Blofeld, and when he gets back in the car, to his shock and to ours, Teresa has been shot and killed. And it's one of those scenes, no matter how many times I watch this movie, and despite knowing what's coming, this scene always gets me. And it's so effective because we fall in love with Tracy in this movie. And that's a testament to Peter Hunt's brilliant directing and to Diana Rigg's portrayal of Teresa. And Bond is devastated and he's left crying, and it's a very effective moment. It's a very tragic scene that gets to the root of James Bond as a tragic figure. Now, the name Tracy Bond returns again much later in Roger Moore's For Your Eyes Only. In the opening teaser, we see Bond bringing flowers to the grave of Tracy Bond, his beloved wife. That's a scene where he's picked up by a helicopter, which turns out to be radio controlled by none other than Blofeld. And this is a connection across those two movies. And for an amateur actor like George Lazenby, he does a great job in this scene. Well, we have to credit Peter Hunt's brilliant directing for getting this great performance out of Lazenby. Because what he did was kind of a neat directorial trick. He had George Lazenby come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and had him rehearse the scene over and over again, and then had him do some takes, but just had him do it over and over again until Lazenby got very exhausted. And finally, the actual intended scene was filmed at 5 o'clock p.m. And what you're seeing is the umpteenth take around 5 o'clock. And you can see that George Lazenby, who's been rehearsing for the past 8 hours, he's physically exhausted and just fatigued, and that translates to the screen as someone who is devastated in emotional agony. And the scene works. Again, a brilliant play by director Peter Hunt. And at the same time, while Bond is more brutal and violent, this shows that there is a vulnerable, sympathetic side to James Bond. And who knows, maybe if George Lazenby had been in more movies, maybe he would have grown more confident and would have grown into the role. Well, apparently, Lazenby was getting pretty obnoxious and arrogant on set. In addition to breaking his arm while skiing, there are other stories of him on set actually shooting a real gun, firing a gun on set, putting everyone on edge, and causing a lot of mischief on set. In one incident, the cast and crew were having a wrap-up party, and George Lazenby wasn't there. And they found him and asked why he wasn't at the party, and he said, "'Cause no one asked me to come." And he said, "No one invites you to a wrap-up party, you just show up." And Lazenby insisted that since he's the star of the movie, the producers should have made it a point personally come and invite him to the party. So you see, he was letting the fame go straight to his head. After filming the movie, they were promoting the film, and all the actors were doing interviews with the press, promoting the movie. Well, George Lazenby grew out his hair long to his shoulders and grew a beard, and he refused to cut his hair and shave his beard to look like James Bond from the movie. So Eon hid him during the marketing of the movie. However, he had to show up to the premiere, so they demanded that he cut his hair and shave his beard. But he refused and showed up to the premiere with the long shoulder-length hair and the beard. So he was certainly defiant and arrogant. Now, ultimately, this film made $64.8 million on a budget of $7 million. So it was very profitable, making almost 9 times its production budget. And it was one of the year's top-grossing movies of 1969. And by all accounts, a highly successful movie. Although it should be said that the box office was only about half of what You Only Live Twice made, still, Eon was very pleased with the results of this non-Connery Bond. And in fact, when this film was re-released, it went on to make a total of $82 million. That's very successful. Eon was happy with the box office, and they wanted George Lazenby for another film. In fact, they were ready to build a whole franchise around him. So they offered him a 7-picture deal plus an extra $1 million in cash under the table as a signing bonus. And George Lazenby turned it down.
What?
His agent, a man named Ronan O'Rahilly, convinced him that the spy movie craze would be over in a few years, and that the new trend in Hollywood was more thoughtful alternative movies like The Graduate. And he didn't want George Lazenby to be stuck in his James Bond contract and also be typecast. And when Lazenby told his agent about the $1 million under the table signing bonus, his agent said, "Clint Eastwood makes $500,000 a movie. And so, to the shock of Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli and everyone else in the world, George Lazenby turned down the role to be James Bond. And so George Lazenby's sole turn as Bond will become a punchline, a synonym for bad choices. In fact, when George Clooney's outing as Batman failed, he was referred to as the George Lazenby of the Batman franchise. So almost immediately he was soft blacklisted from Hollywood and became a laughingstock. George Lazenby said that within a few weeks he saw his celebrity disappear. For example, while filming James Bond, he was able to call the Dorchester and immediately get a table without a reservation. But he said that within 2 weeks of turning down the role, he would call the Dorchester and he wasn't able to get a reservation. And George Lazenby cites his decision not to play Bond as one of the greatest regrets in his life. And boy, I sure hope he fired that agent. And Lazenby was able to get a few small roles. In 1971, he starred in Universal Soldiers, not the one starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. In 1972, he starred in an Italian film, Who Saw Her Die, and he received positive reviews. However, by 1973, he had spent all of his money he made with James Bond, and he was broke, depressed, and was drinking heavily. So here's an interesting bit of trivia. In 1973, Golden Harvest, the Hong Kong movie company, offered him $10,000 to co-star with Bruce Lee in his next movie, The Game of Death. Not the 1979 atrocity that was eventually released 6 years after his death, but the original 1973 movie Game of Death that Bruce Lee himself had planned to write, direct, and star in. The one starring Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the scenes of which were eventually released at the end of the Bruce Lee documentary, The Warrior's Journey, which I definitely recommend. So George Lazenby was in Hong Kong meeting with producer Raymond Chow and was waiting for a meeting with Bruce Lee when Bruce Lee had passed out in actress Betty Ting Pei's apartment. And when Betty Ting Pei called Raymond Chow and said that Bruce Lee had passed out and that she couldn't wake him, it was George Lazenby that told Betty to call the ambulance. So it's kind of a small world in the business of international cinema. Well, George Lazenby ended up staying in Hong Kong and made 3 movies for Golden Harvest. The 1974, The Shrine of Ultimate Bliss, the 1975, The Man from Hong Kong, and the 1976, A Queen's Ransom. So in order to support himself, George Lazenby went on to sell real estate and became a very successful real estate salesman. And he continued to get small cameo roles in television and in films. And with the money he made from these small acting jobs, he would purchase more real estate. And soon, George Lazenby became a very wealthy man, with some estimating his net worth to be around $50 million. So that's not bad for a high school dropout who was told he'd never live beyond the age of 14. So what do you think of On Her Majesty's Secret Service? It's a great spy film that'll have you on the edge of your seat. It's a great romantic movie that'll pull at your heartstrings, and if you're a James Bond fan, this is one of the most significant events in James Bond's life. The moment where 007 met his match, fell in love, got married, and then lost her. So whether you love George Lazenby or hate him, you can't consider yourself a James Bond fan if you haven't seen this movie. So I'd love to know, what is your opinion of this film, and what did you think of Lazenby's performance as James Bond 007? Please let me know in the comments. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the next movie where Sean Connery returned to play James Bond one more time in Diamonds Are Forever. Well, that's it for this video. Don't forget to check out some other videos like my video on Dr. No, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and don't forget to check out my next video, Diamonds Are Forever. Well, that ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.